Welcome. Thanks for joining us. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. The headlines this hour. Lebanon braced for Israel's response to the Hezbollah attack on the Druze town of Majd al-Shams, in which 12 children were killed. Turkey's President Erdogan threatens to invade Israel and do what the Turkish army did in Karabakh and Libya. And Israel faces the traditional controversies at the Olympic Games, with athletes refusing to shake hands or forfeiting games. Flights to and from Beirut were either cancelled or delayed this Monday as the world awaits Israel's response to Sunday's deadly Hezbollah attack on the Druze town of Majd al-Shams. 12 children were killed in that attack, and Israel has vowed to respond. Germany is among the countries calling on citizens to leave Lebanon immediately. The United States insists, though, there is still time for a diplomatic solution. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran has this report.
Lebanon is bracing for Israel's response to Saturday's deadly rocket attack that killed 12 kids and teens in the northern Druze community of Majd al-Shams. And the average citizens are simply waiting to see what tomorrow will bring.
People are afraid and are monitoring the situation day by day, if the situation escalates or not. God willing, it stays like this, and we are satisfied.
Because Israel is unjust and oppressive, we expect, after what happened in Majd al-Shams, that they will make a big misjudgment. But hopefully the war will not escalate or grow.
Throughout Monday, flights in and out of Beirut airport were canceled or delayed, with more and more airlines suspending their routes to Lebanon due to security concerns. And a growing list of countries has issued warnings to their citizens abroad.
I want to assure you that Washington is laser focused on Lebanon. The U.S. Department of State has no higher priority than the safety and security of U.S. citizens overseas. As we continue to monitor the complex and quickly changing situation, I want to take this opportunity to remind you about a few key points on crisis preparedness.
A travel warning and a call to leave Lebanon has been in place since October 2023. I am appealing to all Germans who are still in Lebanon now to use the still available possibilities to leave Lebanon and to urgently do so now.
Hezbollah is on high alert as it reportedly cleared hundreds of sites across Lebanon, including in Beirut, fearing Israel's reprisal. And throughout Monday, the cross-border fire continued. This included an Israeli drone strike on a car and motorcycle in southern Lebanon, resulting in the death of 2 Hezbollah operatives.
We will do everything to restore security and let life continue as it should. Hezbollah will pay a price for this. Our actions will speak for themselves.
Hezbollah, with Iranian backing, launched an Iranian rocket here, which took the lives of 12 pure souls. 12 boys and girls who played soccer here, and unfortunately could not get to the shelter. The heart is torn apart by the severe tragedy. We embrace the families who are going through indescribable suffering. These children are our children. They are all the children of all of us. Israel will not and cannot let this simply pass on by. Our response will come, and it will be harsh.
Meanwhile, the Lebanese Al Akhbar newspaper reports that several Western countries, including the United States, have informed Beirut that while Israel has decided to attack Lebanon, it will be limited in scope and won't include big cities like the capital, Beirut.
No, of course, we don't want war. We don't want any expansion of the war. We don't want escalation. And we're working on it this way. We don't want escalation. The most important thing is that it's an opportunity for them to do something, it shouldn't be big, because we know we cannot control Hezbollah retaliation as well.
Hours earlier, Israel's security cabinet had already approved the nature and target of its response. According to security officials, this will be a limited but significant retaliation.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Ruth Weissman-Lander is a former member of the Knesset and research fellow for the Misgav Institute for National Security, and Nathanael Shuraki is a Middle East analyst. Welcome to you both. Ruth, our response will come and it will be harsh, says the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you think Israel will respond, and when will that response come, and what do you think it might look like?
First of all, Israel will respond. When it will respond is, I think, a matter for the closed cabinet to decide, as well as the IDF, rather than on the media. But there cannot be a quiet, irresponsible act by the government of Israel of not responding to such a heinous attack on truly innocent civilians. I think that Hezbollah got a bit of a fright. In the beginning, they were very quick to take responsibility. In fact, they were a little bit gleeful to take responsibility.
They published a video, didn't they?
Exactly. And they quickly took it off when they understood that this was a huge PR disaster. Probably because they have a significant Druze population within Lebanon that was truly getting more than a little bit infuriated. Not to mention the Druze population within Israel and the Druze population in Syria as well. But most importantly, that within Lebanon. Great warriors in all three countries, and a population which the Hezbollah does take into its considerations.
Nathaniel, there are fears that this could trigger a regional war. We've had that concern for a while now. But today, Iran's president warned France that any Israeli attack on Lebanon would have consequences, as he put it.
Well, that's classic diplomatic, to and fro. That's just a ballet at this point. I want to circle back to the excellent point you made about the Druze population. It's very, very important that we monitor what's going to be the reaction of the Lebanese Druze population. And even though at the very beginning they were indeed infuriated, they quickly tamed their response for political reasons and also for ideological reasons. If you look at what Walid Jumblat, the leader of the main Druze party in Lebanon, said, he did not attack Hezbollah. He didn't even say that Hezbollah was, in fact, the culprit or even main suspect for this attack, which he could very much have done. He didn't do it. He navigated a very thin and very, very Druze line, saying that he condemned the attack and that he mourns for his fellow Druze children that were killed. But he also attacked Israel for being, quote-unquote, hypocritical and trying to sow the discord within the Muslim community between the brothers, because they're all fundamentally an offset of Shia Islam, the Druze, between the Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims, and the Druze, trying to sow the discord within this community. So that's not
He's
very
blaming
much...
Israel for that.
They are blaming Israel for
rather
that.
than Hezbollah.
He's declaratively blaming Israel, yes.
Absolutely.
In order not to have the Hezbollah turn on him.
But that in itself will presumably turn the community against him, because they can see with their own eyes.
I don't believe
what's
he
happening.
represents the view of many of the Druze community within, and there's a lot of anger against the Hezbollah amidst the Druze within Lebanon, as well as the Christians and others as well. Absolutely. Because they're literally hijacking the country and dragging it into war. Yes. Regardless of their very profound solidarity with and so on and so forth. I mean, the language is...
I want to ask about the American response. Sorry, finish your point, Nathan.
Yes, that's mostly true, of course. There is a deep sense within the general public in Lebanon that don't get us there. We see you, Hezbollah. We see what you're doing. You're trying to regain popularity that you lost on the economic front by battling against Israel. But what's striking, however, in the current coverage, including from Maronite's newspaper like L'Orient Le Jour, etc., who are usually very anti-Hezbollah.
They're not mentioning Hezbollah at all.
They're not. They're saying it's a mistake. There's an entire paper asking whose mistake it is. So there's not so much the united anti-Hezbollah front among the Maronite, Druze, and Sunni communities.
Is that from fear, or where does that come from?
It's out of the shifted terrain since October 7 that has massively favored Hezbollah. So if you look at the polls, they still are in minority in terms of support by the Lebanese population. But first, it's rising among all sects, Sunni, Maronites and Druze included. And second, the themes on which they run are now a majority, so pro-Gaza, anti-Israel, etc.
So I just want to add one thing, although I agree with every word you've said. that Israel has been very, very, very precise in the retaliations against the Hezbollah. So only military targets were indeed targeted. Once not only military targets, or rather military targets that would have an effect on the population, because that's what the Hezbollah fights from. In fact, centers of population,
against Israel.
I believe that it would turn
as we saw, of course, in 2006. All right, thank you both. Well, let's go to the north of Israel. Our Robert Swift is, he's in the Golan, in Majd al-Shams, the town which was brutally attacked by Hezbollah on Sunday. Rob, any sign of this much-awaited response from the IDF?
No, not yet as such. There has been ongoing Israeli attacks inside Lebanon, as well as attacks by Hezbollah back across the border. But to be honest, these look like the routine attacks that have been taking place here since October the 8th. There are reports coming out of Lebanese media of a drone strike on a motorbike wounding 3 people in the south of Lebanon. But as we've been discussing in the studio, the response which is expected to the attack on Majd al-Shams is likely to be more significant than these sorts of events. That being said, Hezbollah do appear to be reading the room, and they are expecting something of a larger degree. There are reports for today that Hezbollah has been moving some of its long-range ballistic, its long-range precision missiles, some of the most dangerous weapons in its arsenal that it hasn't used up to this point in the conflict. And this is likely a sign from Hezbollah, essentially trying to check Israel and reduce any response that the Israeli government plays to the attack that took place here. At the same time, Hezbollah understand that they are not able to limit Israel entirely, and many of their fighters and commanders are going to ground in expectation of something big coming from Israel.
And Rob, as we heard in our report earlier, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, freshly back from the United States, visited the community today, a community which, of course, has just had to bury 12 children. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, so the Prime Minister was here. He was received by some of the leaders of the communities from Majd al-Shams and some of the surrounding Druze villages, and he did speak to the media from this location a little bit earlier. He was allowed to do that, as opposed to some of the other members of Likud and other ministers from different faction parties yesterday who arrived, and they were essentially just shouted out and told to leave. Now, there was some protests at the Prime Minister's presence. From what I understand from having spoken to people here on the ground, there was one of the families of the victims who agreed to meet with him, but the remainder of the families refused to do that, with many of them not being interested or happy to be speaking to a government which many people here do seem to feel has abandoned them for many months since the outbreak of war here in the north. Now, it's worth saying that is absolutely not the response that we've had here on the ground. It's not always comfortable to move around this part of the world, and we don't always get a welcome when we arrive to locations. That has not been the case here. Now, that may be just traditional Druze hospitality, but some of the people I've spoken to have also, they seem to be very happy to have us here and very eager that the events that have happened here are shown to the outside world.
And Rob, people you talk to, do they want Israel to respond?
Yeah, they do. Look, first of all, I think it's important to say that there are, even among the Druze in this part of the region, there are a mixture of opinions. We've heard people essentially calling for blood, calling for revenge, saying that if Israel doesn't protect the Druze, then the Druze will protect themselves. At the same time, I've also heard other people from Majd al-Shams saying that acts of revenge won't bring the 12 children back, that war is not what is required now.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it, Rob? Thank you very much, Robert Swift there up in Majd al-Shams. So, Nathaniel, just going back to what you're saying, the Druze community here in Israel are themselves divided as to how Israel should respond.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's not surprising. That's a community that has been nourishing a lot of grievances towards the central government, towards Jerusalem, very understandably so. It's a very, very complex situation. So it didn't start with October 7th, it didn't start with the lack of support provided by Jerusalem in recent months. It's not your, so to speak, typical Druze community. It's a community that is in the so-called occupied Golan Heights. So they still, many of them up until the most recent generations, feel a strong sense of attachment to Syria. And many of them actually do refuse having Israeli citizenship despite it being offered to them. So that's already a terrain that's, in terms of identity, very much complex. Now, what's interesting is that the younger generation, assumedly to which these children were belonging, was getting closer and closer to Israel for a number of mostly economic
and they've seen
reasons.
what Syria has been like.
Absolutely, what Syria has been like. And Hezbollah, I mean, they've been very close to Hezbollah. We don't remember that, but during the Syrian war, Hezbollah was in Syria. Thousands of people there. So they've been close to them. They've seen what Syria has done. They've seen what Syria has done to the Druze. So they're getting closer to it.
Okay, thank you both for now. Now, a Saudi news outlet says that Hamas is blaming Israel's Prime Minister for the failure to reach a hostage deal a day after the Mossad chief David Barnea returned from Rome empty-handed from the latest negotiations. This report in Ashaq al-Aswad cites Hamas as claiming that Israel strongly opposes the release of certain Palestinian prisoners. 115 hostages are still being held in Gaza. Let's get the reaction to that from our Emily Francis, who joins us now from Hostages Square. Emily, another round of talks appears to have hit a roadblock, yet more devastating news for the families of the hostages.
Hi, good evening, Laura. Yeah, I think at this point, speaking on behalf of the families, not surprised. And now, for this report to come out, allegedly Hamas blaming the prime minister for the delaying tactics, definitely will not add wind to the sails of the hostage families. Many of them not here today. Maybe this is also part of their message of feeling deflated. Normally, when I'm here, you could at least see one or two family members. Mainly now, it's different delegations from the United States and elsewhere here to lend their support. And obviously, this is kind of the heart and soul kind of focal point for many people that are visiting. Also, let's not forget the report from Telegraph citing two Israeli sources claiming that Hamas sent videos torturing various hostages, apparently sent those to Itamar Ben-Gvir, who was saying this is simply not true. But again, it was a well-attributed article, and we do know from other testimonies from some of the other hostages, including Itai and Maya Regev. Itai, who had a bullet wound, a gunshot wound, removed without anesthesia. Of course, Itai and Maya have since been released. Maya, according to Channel 12 in an interview, said that they would pour alcohol and chlorine into her open wound, which was literally a dangling foot that they sewed on not straight. So let's put this all in perspective, adding to the sexual violence and whatnot. The families do not want their cause ignored, and of course want a hostage deal as soon as possible. And also, on a more demoralizing note, Thursday actually marks 300 days, so they're of course planning a big rally here. Hard to believe that we're only 65 days away from a full year.
Emily, thank you very much. Emily Francis there. Well, the Israeli government is concerned that the UK may soon end arms sales to Israel, just as a war with Hezbollah looks increasingly likely. The centre-left government of Keir Starmer has already restored funding to UNRWA, despite evidence of its links to Hamas, and the UK has withdrawn its objection to the ICC arrest warrants for the Prime Minister and Defence Minister. Let's go to London. We're joined by Jonathan Sacerdoti. So, Jonathan, first of all, are these reports about an end to UK arms sales to Israel true?
Well, Israeli sources have indicated that the UK's Labour government is preparing to impose an arms export ban on Israel, but we haven't had confirmation of that yet. It will come, if it does, following a series of decisions by the new British government, which have been viewed with disapproval by many Israeli officials. Firstly, British Foreign Secretary David Lammy announced that Britain would lift its freeze on funding for UNRWA. In his inaugural speech to the Parliament, Lammy stated that Britain would release £21 million, or $26.5 million, to support life-saving operations in Gaza and to provide basic services in the area. But that, of course, came after much criticism of UNRWA when Israel revealed evidence that many involved with UNRWA had in fact been also affiliated with Hamas and working even on October the 7th attacks. And then secondly, on Friday, Britain decided to withdraw its objection to the International Criminal Court decision to issue arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, or at least the application for those warrants. The Conservative government in its last days had objected to that on technical grounds, in fact, but that's something that the Labour government has withdrawn. So this arms embargo, certainly, if it were to happen, would follow in that line of negative decisions made by this government, and that will be of some disappointment to many British Jews who were won over by the Labour Party after the years of anti-Semitism under its Jeremy Corbyn leadership period. Many gave back their votes to the party, believing that Keir Starmer was better for Jewish people, better on Israel, and the party itself found that it struggled with its pro-Israel stance during the election campaign, and now maybe it's backing off on that pro-Israel stance.
And Jonathan, amid the current escalation with Lebanon, we are hearing reports of British Navy frigates being sent to the Lebanese coast to help with possible evacuations of British citizens. Any truth to that?
Again, no confirmation from the Foreign Office when I reached out to them, but we're told that there are reports of the British Navy vessels which have been sent to the Mediterranean. They could serve as a potential evacuation operation. Many countries are indeed advising their nationals to leave Lebanon urgently, and indeed planes are stopping leaving Lebanon at the moment. So it may be that should there be British nationals stranded there, they will need that potential evacuation option from Lebanon. And according to Channel 12 in Israel, that started Monday morning today, so it could be that that is happening. And they also report that those vessels may assist in transferring humanitarian aid to Gaza, something which is still a concern for the United Kingdom.
Jonathan Sacerdoti in London, thank you. Ruth Wasserman-Land and Nathaniel Shirakoui still with me in the studio. And Ruth, we just got a statement from the White House a few moments ago saying that Israel has every right to respond to that deadly Hezbollah rocket attack. John Kirby, the national security spokesman, has also said that there is evidence it was Hezbollah. There's no doubt about that. We're hearing that from the White House while we're hearing that the British are thinking about halting arms sales at this particular time. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts is that the world, especially the public, needs to understand that radical Islam is about to take over, first and foremost, Europe rather quickly, perhaps simply because the public has not awoken. And it's very difficult to see that irresponsible politicians and leaders do not tell their publics the truth and distort information. And I say this from no political viewpoint, but from a professional analysis of radical Islam. Shiite on the one hand, led by Ayatollah-led Iran, or rather Mullah-led Republic, Islamic Republic of Iran, and on the other side, Qatar and Erdogan, the Muslim Brotherhood, and radical Islam from the Muslim Brotherhood side. And it's very odd to see that whereas Egypt, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia all understand the dangers of radical Islam. In fact, this kind of Islam, if pronounced, is completely illegal and outlawed, whereas in Europe it is almost encouraged, and one can see horrible incidents happening on the streets of Europe. This is something that is incomprehensible to me, and people...
So you think the British government is caving to that rather than...
Of course, because there is a certain rise in the population, in the electorate, and they are indeed caving in to feeding the public what it wants to hear, and that is irresponsible leadership.
Netanyahu, that statement from the White House, I mean, there has been a criticism that the Biden administration restrained Israel from dealing with Hezbollah properly at the beginning of this conflict. We're now hearing them say, you know, Israel has every right to respond. Do you see any differences there?
Well, I don't think it's a major shift. It's just that they have to say that in order to retain their credibility when they will, and they will inevitably pull the brakes in a couple of days. So right now they're giving Israel a little leeway because they have to, because of the public outcry and the legitimacy of that response. But I do not think this is a major policy shift. In fact, the policy of Hochstein towards Lebanon has been to broker some kind of ceasefire with Hezbollah. And his idea, which is not the worst idea in the world, but might be a little idealistic, is to... Sorry?
A little.
A little. Well, that's how you make sometimes progress, at least temporary ones, is to push back.
Do you think Hezbollah can be negotiated with?
Oh yes, no, that's for sure. I mean, they're extremely pragmatic.
Really?
Yes, I mean they are.
How so? They're sitting literally in the living rooms of Israeli inhabitants on the northern border.
Of course.
And basically doing everything they can that no other sovereign country would.
Well, they just fired a rocket and killed a bunch of kids on a football field.
But
absolutely no. I'm not saying they're not violent, brutal, and.
But you think they're more? Isn't that the miscalculation that got Israel here in the first place, thinking that terrorist groups are rational actors?
I think Hamas is also a rational actor. I think there's this good old book that was used by Daesh called Management of Savagery. So a terrorist...
Machiavelli made it up in the first place. In fact, the Russians, the Soviets perfected it. The Iranians then learned the craft and put it towards the Hezbollah and Hamas. It's all a matter of what we perceive as logical. And it's a different kind of logic, but I wouldn't say that they're pragmatic in the Western sense.
You think they want to rule
self-interest? And
what is their self-interest?
That's the thing. It's a black box.
In moving backwards towards
the Litani River. Good question.
Which is exactly what the UN wanted in the first place, and why UNIFIL is there.
But who's going to enforce? I think it all comes back to who will enforce it.
Well, there is no one to enforce it. UNIFIL failed.
Absolutely. Now they have more of an impetus to do this. Before they had zero incentive.
We're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you. It's time for a short break. When we come back, President Erdogan of Turkey says he will invade Israel. More on that next.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has been openly hostile to Israel for months. Now, though, he's taken it to a whole new level, threatening to invade the country. And he's likened it to what the Turkish army did in Libya and the Armenian heartland of Nagorno-Karabakh. Joe Brown has this report.
Another day, another foreign leader threatening Israel.
We need to be very strong so that Israel cannot do these ridiculous things to Palestine. Just as we entered Karabakh, just as we entered Libya, we can do something similar to them.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, a man who before October 7th seemed to be thawing the cold relationship between Ankara and Jerusalem, has suggested that he would help an invasion of Israel in the same way his country funded Azerbaijan's war with Armenia over the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh and gave military support to the UN-backed Libyan government of national accord during the Libyan civil war.
There is no reason for us not to. We only have to be strong so that we can take these steps.
Erdogan's comments do not come as a shock. Just before the Gaza war, Turkey's long-running spats with Israel seemed to be ending when both countries established a diplomatic presence inside the other's country. But following Israel's war with Hamas, the Turkish leader has offered unwavering support to the latter, hosting Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh in Ankara, calling Netanyahu a, quote, Nazi on several occasions, and rebuffing the idea that Hamas is a terror group. Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz slammed Erdogan's statements, comparing the Turkish leader to Saddam Hussein and urging him to take note of the fate of the Iraqi dictator. But will Turkey be the eighth front in Israel's multi-frontal war? Probably not. As a NATO member, Turkey could face severe repercussions for invading a close ally of influential NATO nations. So whilst Erdogan's populist rhetoric may earn adulation from his followers, it remains, at the time being, just rhetoric.
Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Dr. Sinan Sidi. He's a senior fellow on Turkey at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies. Good evening to you. Thank you for joining us, Sinan. So should Israel take these threats from President Erdogan seriously?
I don't know why it wouldn't, particularly in this heightened time of conflict in the region. Obviously, not just the war in Gaza, but the potential for a new conflict with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Right, Israelis are understandably on edge for anything related to sort of potential terrorist attacks or widening terrorist initiatives by Hezbollah and Hamas. So, given that a NATO country with the second largest military has just threatened directly to enter Israel, what can only mean a military invasion, I would take them seriously, even if it is just rhetoric, because it's irresponsible.
I mean, throwing around these kinds of threats, is this something that NATO should address, perhaps, seeing as Turkey is a member of NATO?
Absolutely, and it has. Erdogan is no stranger not just to hyperbolic comments, but he's also no stranger to directly threatening other states that are allies of NATO or are indeed members of NATO. We saw this a couple of years ago continuously with Erdogan's threats to come in the middle of the night and invade Greece, a reference to his intention to sort of, retake the Greek islands, which Turkey gave up claim to in 1923. And that really worried and shook, essentially, Washington. And what NATO did at that time, or I should say Washington did at that time, was impose conditionalities on Turkey's desire to acquire F-16 fighter jets. So a few things could be done. I mean, on the NATO and the US end, one thing that could be done is, they could be pretty forceful. They can't just ignore it. I mean, they're threatening a major US ally with invasion. That's one thing they can do. But also, presumably, Washington has the power to sort of, make the pinch hurt a little bit more, whereby if Turkey is sort of seeking to really acquire those fighter jets and armament from the United States, it could broaden the definition of, conciliatory language and request that Turkey not only doesn't antagonize present members of NATO, but other vital US allies such as Israel, but, doesn't have to stop there.
He's threatening to attack Israelis, but he's also dividing Palestinians to a certain extent, isn't he? He's criticised Mahmoud Abbas for not coming to Turkey and says that the Hamas, one of the Hamas leaders should be invited to Turkey to address the parliament. I mean, what is his impact on the Palestinian cause that he claims to champion so passionately?
So that's unclear. But what you're suggesting is absolutely right. Look, if the Palestinian Authority is declared to be the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people that should be in direct negotiations with the international community as well as Israel to sort of pursue what happens after the conflict against Hamas ends, then Erdogan is directly undermining that by addressing and requesting that Hamas, a terrorist organization, be at the table. And that really undermines Fatah's position and the Palestinian Authority's position, I should say, to directly negotiate on behalf of the Palestinian people. So Erdogan's not helping matters. But it should also sort of, all this sort of inflammatory rhetoric also comes on the back of Erdogan's continued intentions right now to, quote unquote, normalize ties with the Syrian regime. And that's another problem because in top of the invasion sort of threat against Israel, in the event that this conflict widens and we see a direct conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, what if, Turks seek the assistance of Syria to essentially target Israel in addition to what's already going on? So there's a lot of worrying sort of parts moving here.
Dr. Sinan Sidi at the FDD, thank you very much. Well, Ruth Wasserman-Land is with me in the studio, former member of the Knesset and now at the Misgav Institute for National Security. Ruth, more alarming comments from President Erdogan. I mean, it feels like an awful long time ago, doesn't it, that Israel was sending rescue teams to Turkey in the wake of its terrible earthquake?
Unfortunately, President Erdogan is a disciple of one of the founding leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood. Within his long presidency or leadership of Turkey, he has indeed at some points reached out to Israel, changed his rhetoric, reached out to Europe to be part of the European Union, and particularly when economic issues were worrying within Turkey itself, he was very eager to extend a hand and to be cooperative in that sense. In fact, this happened several years ago. However, he was, is, remains, and will be part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Again, I remind the viewers who hadn't heard me before, this movement is outlawed in Egypt, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and other countries that very well understand the difficulty and the complexity of such a movement and its ideology on regional stability. And he's no different. And the fact that a leader, even though I do believe that his rhetoric is for internal purposes because the Islamists within his country were so-called raising an arm and their voice against him. However, to say something like that as a NATO member, as my predecessor commented before, and as a person who has the second largest army in the region, is absolutely responsible and should be taken extremely seriously.
Okay, Ruth, for now. Thank you. Well, as Yemen's Houthis ramp up their attacks on both Israel and on global shipping in the Red Sea, the United Arab Emirates appears to have a long-term strategy designed to rein in their influence. Through its control of an anti-Houthi militia, the UAE has taken control of one of Yemen's islands. Socotra lies in a strategic location some 350 kilometres south of Yemen and about 250 kilometres east of Somalia. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by our Dubai correspondent, Bastien Bourri. Bastien, what is happening on this remote and little-known island?
Well, much of the interest in this island, as you said, lies in its location. Socotra is at the exit of the Gulf of Aden between Somalia and Yemen, which is one of the world's busiest maritime corridors, notably for the transport of oil from the Gulf to the west and for the transport of goods from Asia to the west and from the west to Asia. And as early as 2020, so before the signing of the Abraham Accords between the UAE and Israel, this island was already being exploited militarily by the Emiratis, who used it to provide logistical support for their own military intervention in Yemen against the Houthis, with the intention of maintaining their grip there once the war was over. So Abu Dhabi deployed hundreds of troops, a military arsenal, and agents on the island to convince the local population not to oppose them, which in a way they succeeded in doing. And from 2020 onwards, Israel actually joined this project, which was let's say, one of the secret clauses of the Abraham contract, if you will. And today we're seeing military bases being built by the Israelis and the Emiratis, landing strips for commercial and combat aircraft, and a sort of a process of sharing intelligence between the two on everything that's going on in this region. And of course, we know there's a lot going on.
And tell us, Bastien, how did what happened on October 7th, the brutal Hamas assault on Israel, speed up this strategy?
The fact that things have accelerated in recent months is also due actually to Israeli interests. First, the Israelis are seeking to ensure the security of their own maritime trade, as about a quarter of it passes through this geographically narrow zone. And if the Houthis in Yemen decided to block the passage, the economic consequences would be very bad. Second, the Israelis want to use this opportunity to gather data and expand their capabilities, particularly in terms of espionage in the region. And finally, there's Iran. We know that there's a naval battle between the Israelis and the Iranians. So Israel's presence on this island, what's more, an Arab island, could provide it with some kind of leverage over Tehran.
Bastien Boré in Dubai, thank you very much. The Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to meet Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, for the first time when he hosts the summit of BRICS members later this year. Several Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia and the UAE, joined the group, which includes China and India, earlier this year. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Anna Borshkovskaya, Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Thanks for being with us, Anna. And Putin says he's eager to meet with President Pezeshkian. What do you think will be the main focus of cooperation between the two leaders?
I think one likely focus of cooperation between the two leaders is going to be economic. And this development signals the continual growing Russia and Iran relationship. In the last several weeks, there have been a number of announcements about Russia's Gazprom, which is Russia's main energy, mainly state-control giant, really, signing an agreement with Iran. And so this is an important development, and that's one thing to be watching.
And what will be worrying for people here in Israel is the increased collaboration on drones. Is that something that is likely to be discussed?
That is absolutely one possibility. The fact of the matter is, when you think about what is each side getting out of this relationship, right? Russia has been getting Iranian cooperation on the Ukrainian battlefield, which can potentially translate into other battlefields. So, of course, the growing military relationship between Russia and Iran is absolutely something to be watching as well.
And just in terms of diplomacy and symbolism, Anna, to what extent is this a huge opportunity for Putin to show that, you know, despite Western opposition to his war in Ukraine, he does still command international legitimacy. He can get a whole bunch of countries to come to Russia and meet with him and talk business and all the rest of it. I mean, this is a diplomatic win for him, isn't it?
I think you're right. At the very least, from an optics perspective, but also from a diplomatic perspective, yeah, this is a win for him. It is also a win for Iran. Again, when you think about what is each side getting out of these meetings, it's a way to showcase that neither Russia nor Iran are isolated by the West, and that their resistance to international norms, international standards, continues to develop.
And what about the Arab countries, the most recent recruits to the BRICS group of nations, the Saudis, for example, and Egypt and the UAE? What do they bring to the group?
Well, they bring to the group more of this diplomatic win for Russia, I think, but also as far as these countries are concerned, they're also signaling to the West that they have other options, that they are looking to have a balance of relations between great powers, Russia, China, and the United States. And also, from an economic perspective, tied together with these political issues that we've discussed, it's a signal that they have options.
Anna Borshkovskaya, great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Ruth Wasserman-Land is with me in the studio. So you've got the Russians hosting this very large summit later this year, the Americans becoming increasingly focused on their own internal politics. This will all have an impact on the region, won't it?
I believe that it will, but it also highlights the need for regional coalitions, and it almost sounds like a Hollywood movie, but really coalition of those who stand on the right side of the battle against those who stand on the other side. And there is, unfortunately, a kind of an axis between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea and other partners that in fact feed one another in terms of their basic needs, whether they're economic and or military, and definitely countries that are in need of economic aid, for example Egypt, and that's very important to watch, are indeed signaling that they are diversifying economic investment options and dependency in terms of military, that they are not wholly and completely dependent on just one source. And that's worrying.
Ruth, thank you. Now, death threats, booing and competitors refusing to shake hands. Israeli athletes are enduring the usual hostility at the Olympic Games in Paris, but it's not stopping them from having the time of their lives, nor from making their nation proud. Our Joe Brown has more.
Israel's appearance at international events during the Gaza war was always going to be contentious. We saw it during Eurovision, and now we are seeing it at the Olympics.
I think there is a small group of people, very noisy, very unhuman, very coward, that choose to, to destroy the Olympic values and spirit.
In preparation for the inevitable backlash against an Israeli presence, French police bulked up security around the Israeli athletes in a joint operation with the Shin Bet. But despite this, French police have received reports of death threats against 3 Israeli athletes and allegations of anti-Semitic chanting at Israeli Olympic football games. But it's not just the crowd who are giving Israelis a hard time, it's the athletes too. Algerian judoka Redouane Massoud is accused of intentionally bulking to weigh more than 73 kilograms to avoid playing Israeli judo star Toha Boutboul.
And I think this is a disgrace. I think that, you can play with the weigh in the category. I wasn't prepared, but everybody knows this is political issues. My heart goes to this athlete. I'm sure it's not his decision. I'm sure it's, the management, and I think these guys, the coach, the delegation, has to be punished, because it's not about the athlete. He's a victim of the system,
Incredibly, it's not the first time Boutboul has been at the centre of an Algerian-manufactured Olympic storm. In the last Olympics 3 years ago, Algeria's Fethi Nourine refused to play against eventual bronze medalist Boutboul, earning the Algerian a 10-year ban from competing. And this is not the only incident involving an Israeli judoka at this year's Games. After Tajikistan's Nurali Emomali beat the Israeli Baruch Shmailov, the Tajik refused to shake Shmailov's hand, reportedly yelling Allahu Akbar instead. But in a twist of irony, in the next round, Emomali suffered a dislocated shoulder and was defeated, meaning he couldn't shake anyone's hand even if he wanted to. But despite the safety concerns, Yael Arad, head of the Israeli Olympic Committee and a former Olympic judoka herself, says that what has been experienced online and on the ground couldn't be further apart.
There are in several occasions threats, real threats, directly to the telephones of the athletes and their families that they're going to die. Threats that you shouldn't come to Paris because we will kill you. But I must say that on the other side, we get here in Paris so much love from so many people.
Sports journalist and the founder of Babagol is here with me in the studio. Hi there, Uri. It's such a shame, isn't it? You train all those years and then you end up sabotaging yourself when it comes to the Olympic Games.
It became some kind of a tradition already, a second Olympics in a row that we have an Algerian judoka who is refusing to compete against an Israeli opponent. And it's mind-blowing to see how far hate and ignorance can take you when you literally invested your whole life practicing and working. But on the other hand, and we must be aware of this fact, for a huge part of the world, and for the Islamic world maybe, this guy, as we are seeing in the social networks, is being hailed for standing for a bigger cause.
So he'll get a sponsorship deal now and everything.
Yeah, and it's going way back. You know, back in 1971, Maccabi Tel Aviv went all the way to the AFC Champions League final to play against El Shouta from Iraq, who also withdrew and came back to Baghdad on the bus like the champions of Asia.
Even though they
despite the fact
played.
that the AFC handed Maccabi Tel Aviv the championship title. So, you know, ignorance and neglecting the fact that Israel is a valid, you know, country that exists and competes, and among the...
I mean, a lot of Israelis might be scratching their heads saying, what did we ever do to Tajikistan?
Well, yeah, you know, the Tajiks... It's funny, you know, officially Tajikistan has no problem with Israel whatsoever, in very surprising gesture from Nourali Amomali. But, you know, as we've seen in this beautiful VTR, there is a prize for any gesture.
Yeah, there's always karma, isn't there, Ruth?
Yeah.
Not only that, may I say that it's absolutely opposite to sportsmanship and should be very severely punished, because aren't the entire idea, or isn't the entire idea of this whole event to really bring nations together, to stabilize relationships, and that's the beauty of the whole issue. And apart from that, I'd like to just mention one thing about Tajikistan. The whole area of Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and that entire area has been prone to a lot of Iranian pressures and a lot of Iranian intransience. And there's an attempt by Iran to really impact and export its radicalism in those countries. So there's a lot of impact.
There's a lot of pressure, and I can only imagine on the
There is a strong cultural connection between the Central Asian countries and Iran. But one thing I must say in the matters of what you said about sportsmanship, I prefer 100 times a Tajik judoka who is maybe not shaking hands or making different gestures, but do compete and participate in the act of sports, rather than one who just withdraw and quit the competition.
Absolutely, of course.
Tell us then, where might we expect some gold for Israel?
In tennis, I don't know. I must say that my hopes for a gold medal got a good boost maybe after that I discovered last night that Artyom Dolgovyat will participate in the final of the gymnastics on Saturday night, despite having a shaky result in the first round. He's in the final. He's among the 15 best gymnastic athletes. Yet, maybe in the surf, we will see from Lelior, Anat Lelior, who made a good result yesterday, and tomorrow will compete in a second hit in the third round, is also a good prospect for a medal. We need to realize that the first 2 days, these are not the prospects for medals from the Israeli team. There's more to come, especially in the judo, that we've seen all the competitors going out on the round of 16 or the qualifying round. The best is yet to come. Avishag Sember will compete, and more other prominent names. So my guess for 4 or 5 medals for Israel is still on the table, Laura.
And I mean, I guess they're pleased just to be taking part. I mean, with all the global hostility and hatred that we saw. Poor Aidan Golan, of course, at the Eurovision Song Contest. But they're doing their best, aren't they?
Yeah, imagine that the Olympics and being an Olympic athlete is a very difficult task, because nobody recognizes your hard work during your daily life, you know, for 4 years, just work. And sometimes a lot of these athletes are funding from their own pocket several of the preparations until there is a sponsor, until the Israeli Olympic Committee recognize their work and their quest to become an Olympic athlete. So nothing but respect to them, whether they are winning a medal or just competing and representing us there.
Yeah, good luck to them. Absolutely.
Yes,
and unfortunately, not a day can go by for the athletes where they're not thinking about what's happening back home. And they did hold a minute's silence, didn't they?
Yes.
Sorry, for the 12 Druze children who were murdered by Hezbollah yesterday.
Yes, we've just watched Yael Arad, the head of the delegation of Israeli Olympic team. Very important, I think. You know, this year's delegation with 88 athletes it's a massive delegation, because you have also the football team with 18 footballers that is participating, which made the delegation much more bigger. So yesterday, after all the competitions ended, the whole delegation gathered together, shared some words, shared some emotions and thoughts. And, you know, it was very difficult to report on the events in the past weekend. I was here Saturday night. Yesterday I spoke on the radio in several stations. Very difficult even to think about, you know, just watching the Olympics when 12 children died in a football in a football match, in a football game, in a football field.
I know the irony of that horrific act, and then to hear the Israeli football team being booed, it's
unbelievable.
Astonishing,
Simply don't understand. They are misinformed. They are fed disinformation by governments, by groups that...
by the media. We didn't even get to talk about how the media has covered the attack.
Terrible.
Absolutely astonishing.
Sure.
All right, on that note, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Ruth Wasserman-Lans, Uri Levy. Thank you very much to you both. Do stay with us here on I24 News. Kalev Ben-David is here next with tonight's rundown. Good night.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות I24 News.
I24 News launches its fourth channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
I24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on I24 News.
Tensions in the north as Lebanon awaits what Prime Minister Netanyahu vows will be a harsh response to the Hezbollah rocket attack that killed 12 children in Majd al-Shams. We'll have the latest. A dramatic confrontation as far-right activists aligned with National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir break into an IDF base protesting the military police's detention of soldiers suspected of abusing a Palestinian prisoner there. We'll break down the controversy. And Turkey's President Erdogan threatens to invade Israel over its war against Hamas. But how serious is he? We'll take a closer look. This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben-David. Tensions running high across the Israel-Lebanon border as Jerusalem weighs its response to the Hezbollah rocket attack that killed 12 children in the Jewish town of Majd al-Shams. Israel and Hezbollah did exchange fire across the northern frontier today, with Lebanon saying 2 people were killed from the IDF fire. Still, a far harsher reaction is expected from Israel. Our response will come, and it will be hard, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said during a visit to Majd al-Shams. But can Israel give a deserving response without igniting an all-out and possible regional war? Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has more in this report.
Lebanon is bracing for Israel's response to Saturday's deadly rocket attack that killed 12 kids and teens in the northern Druze community of Majd al-Shams. And the average citizens are simply waiting to see what tomorrow will bring.
People are afraid and are monitoring the situation day by day, if the situation escalates or not. God willing, it stays like this, and we are satisfied.
Because Israel is unjust and oppressive, we expect, after what happened in Majd al-Shams, that they will make a big misjudgment. But hopefully the war will not escalate or grow.
Throughout Monday, flights in and out of Beirut airport were canceled or delayed, with more and more airlines suspending their routes to Lebanon due to security concerns. And a growing list of countries has issued warnings to their citizens abroad.
I want to assure you that Washington is laser focused on Lebanon. The U.S. Department of State has no higher priority than the safety and security of U.S. citizens overseas. As we continue to monitor the complex and quickly changing situation, I want to take this opportunity to remind you about a few key points on crisis preparedness.
A travel warning and a call to leave Lebanon has been in place since October 2023. I am appealing to all Germans who are still in Lebanon now to use the still available possibilities to leave Lebanon and to urgently do so now.
Hezbollah is on high alert as it reportedly cleared hundreds of sites across Lebanon, including in Beirut, fearing Israel's reprisal. And throughout Monday, the cross-border fire continued. This included an Israeli drone strike on a car and motorcycle in southern Lebanon, resulting in the death of 2 Hezbollah operatives.
We will do everything to restore security and let life continue as it should. Hezbollah will pay a price for this. Our actions will speak for themselves.
Hezbollah, with Iranian backing, launched an Iranian rocket here, which took the lives of 12 pure souls. 12 boys and girls who played soccer here, and unfortunately could not get to the shelter. The heart is torn apart by the severe tragedy. We embrace the families who are going through indescribable suffering. These children are our children. They are all the children of all of us. Israel will not and cannot let this simply pass on by. Our response will come, and it will be harsh.
Meanwhile, the Lebanese Al Akhbar newspaper reports that several Western countries, including the United States, have informed Beirut that while Israel has decided to attack Lebanon, it will be limited in scope and won't include big cities like the capital, Beirut.
No, of course, we don't want war. We don't want any expansion of the war. We don't want escalation. And we're working on it this way. We don't want escalation. The most important thing is that it's an opportunity for them to do something, it shouldn't be big, because we know we cannot control Hezbollah retaliation as well.
Hours earlier, Israel's security cabinet had already approved the nature and target of its response. According to security officials, this will be a limited but significant retaliation.
And let's go to our correspondent, Robert Swift, who is up there in northern Israel. And Robert, let's take a look at the day because, yes, we saw the IDF strike. We saw Hezbollah response. But we're expecting, unfortunately, it to get a lot heavier there, you might say, in the north in the coming days.
Yeah, that's right. There has been a series of cross-border attacks, both by Hezbollah and by the IDF. But this is nothing above the level scale, the normal scale of the skirmishing which takes place here on a daily basis. So, although there was some fires just to the south of Kiryat Shmona today, caused by rocket falls there, these incidents didn't look like anything that we're waiting for in terms of a response to the attack against Majd al-Shams. Now, obviously, the IDF would like to keep Hezbollah guessing as to when and how that response would come. There are some that might expect it to be an overnight strike with the IDF launching air attacks and artillery, possibly attacks from the sea. At the minute, nothing like that has occurred, and it does just remain the routine cross-border skirmishes so far.
Right. Now you're there in Majd al-Shams on, of course, that football field where this tragedy occurred. Give us a sense. We see people kind of milling about behind you. Give us a sense of how it's been up there this day as that community grapples with this enormous tragedy.
That's right. So this is the second full day since the attack, and still... since we've arrived, people have been coming constantly into the football field, mostly just standing around talking. There's a lot of family members of the wider community coming here to spend some time at the site. Now, we've been speaking to them. The responses we've heard from people have been a mixture of calls for revenge and also people taking the other approach, the opposite approach, saying that further bloodshed won't bring the children back. But some form of retaliation is expected, and it does seem from what we've spoken to that is what the majority of the community here expect, that the state of Israel should support them against Hezbollah following this action. Now, I have to also say that while the politicians that have been visiting Majd al-Shams have not received a very warm welcome, the Prime Minister was here earlier today and there was some protests against his presence, although not nearly as severe as the reaction that several ministers received yesterday when they were basically shouted out of this location. Now, so while there has been that response to politicians visiting, journalists, on the other hand, have been quite welcome. I'm not entirely clear if that is just traditional Druze hospitality or if that is a representation of the fact that the community here wants the outside world to see what's happened to them, wants to get the message out following the deaths of these 12 children.
Right, and we've seen this social media campaign, All Eyes on Majd al-Shams, sort of play in All Eyes in Rafah, and that is certainly a deserving of all eyes now, that community and what it has suffered there. Robert Swift in Majd al-Shams, thank you for joining us. And we have with us in studio IDF Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Doron Avital. He's the former commander of Special Forces for the IDF, our correspondent Nicole Tzedek. But let's start with Balir Sladin, also a correspondent of I-24 News, who he himself comes from the Druze community in Israel. And you heard Robert's account of the reaction given today by Prime Minister Netanyahu. I guess you could say mixed, welcomed by some leaders. He did encounter some boos. Give us a sense of how the community is feeling and also what happened and also about the government.
Yes, and let's explain why there's a mixture of this response to the Prime Minister's visit. Because of the fact that the Prime Minister he went there and he met with the local, the mayors of these villages in the Golan, the local councils there, the head of the local council, and all of them are, of course, has a citizenship, Israeli citizenship, and those who are calling for more Israelization of the Golan. That's why we have seen the photos from the Prime Minister's office, just like the ones that we're seeing right now in front of us, that are showing the the community there welcoming him. But on the other hand, if we look at what is circulating on social media, we're seeing that there are lots of protests there. Tens or maybe hundreds of people from the Golan went outside and called him and said, told him to leave the Golan, saying that you're not Mr. Security and you're not Mr. Economy. You have no place here. So there is this mixture, but the Prime Minister's office, of course, wants to show only the photos that is that looks good for him, of course. Now, we're seeing that also the people from the Golan are issuing a statement, a very interesting statement, because of this whole controversy about their view and their reaction and the fact that this happened in the Golan, which is a city or a town that is considered to be Syrian for them, at least. They're Arabs, of course, and they're sharing the same enemy, quote unquote, which is Israel, at least for most of the people there. So they're issuing this statement from the religious leadership there. They're saying that we are condemning any incitement. That's what they are saying, because of the fact that many people there are calling for revenge. They're saying that this is not our manner. We don't believe in revenge. This is not, we're condemning these calls for revenge toward Hezbollah. They're not saying that Hezbollah did this or Israel did this, because, you know, of the controversy around this as well. They are calling, and this is very interesting, they're calling this themselves that from our manner, the Arab and Islamic and monotheistic manner. Now, the Druze are not Muslims, but they came from Islam. It is a bit complicated, as you know, we can go back and talk about the whole history of this whole thing. But it's interesting that they are calling themselves Arabs, Muslims, and monotheistic, and they are signing this statement while saying that we are the religious leadership in the occupied Syrian Golan. I'm not sure that everybody in the Golan would, you know, agree and approve this statement, but at least the religious leadership sees it right to say that in this time.
All right, and as you discussed yesterday, the younger generation of Druze feel quite differently. Some of them even, for example, trying to obtain Israeli citizenship, even serving in the IDF.
They do.
Doron, though, no equivocating from Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's promising a hard response to this. But the question is, what kind of response, when that response will be, and of course, what are the risks it will carry?
Well, Israel has to calibrate what kind of a response. It has to be a response that has some significance. It cannot be within the equation that we've gotten accustomed to in the last few months. So it can be either a quality target that has some significance. It can be a Lebanese target, as we did in Yemen, in Hudeta, though I'm not sure we are rushing to such targets, because we still keep this distinction between the Lebanese infrastructure. As it is, Lebanon is fragile and so on, so we don't even to disturb it any further. But whether we have such a quality target or a massive exchange of fires from different locations, and then you'll have a few days of exchange of fire. And of course we are hoping, the IDF hopes, and also I think Hezbollah hopes, that it wouldn't extend to a full-blown war. But this is the risk that the army has to calculate right now.
And Nicola, certainly a full-blown war. Israel doesn't want to see it, but other parties even more don't want to see that, especially the U.S.
There have been many talks today between Israeli leaders and U.S. counterparts. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant spoke with his U.S. counterpart, Lloyd Austin. We saw U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking with Israeli President Isaac Herzog. So they're absolutely talking, and the message that we're getting from the White House right now is that they fully support Israel's right to respond to this deadly attack. However, they want to see that response in a limited scope, so that it does send a response, but it doesn't boil over into an all-out war, because as you said, they say Israel doesn't want this war, Lebanon doesn't want this war. Doesn't seem Hezbollah wants this war either. They would have started something bigger, and certainly right now the United States doesn't want it either. So they're showing their support, but still stating, let this be a limited response when they do respond.
All right. Well, certainly a tricky line that the Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu, the military, will have to walk in the next few days when they decide how to respond to this. Let's move on now to the latest on the talks for a hostage deal, a hostage release deal. Mossad Director David Barnea, who is leading the Israeli side of the negotiations to reach a hostage deal, returned from Rome last night after meeting with the U.S., Egyptian, and Qatari officials who are trying to finalize agreement to free more captives from Gaza in exchange for a ceasefire. But those who are hoping for a breakthrough were disappointed. A government statement simply said that the sides discussed this document with the clarifications regarding the draft agreement that was conveyed from Israel. The negotiations on the main issues will continue in the coming days. Hamas releasing a statement saying they are studying the latest proposal. What's more, let's go to our correspondent Emily Francis, who is in Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. And Emily, again, the hostages, unfortunately, have to wait. Anyone who's hoping that trip to Rome might produce a breakthrough, doesn't look like it's going to happen.
Yep, Kalev, it's been a hurry up and wait for nearly 300 days now, which is hard to believe that Thursday will mark 300 days, meaning 65 days away from a complete year since October 7th. And I think, the families, the whole country, the world hanging on to any bits of hope they can. But of course, being used to potential deals not going through is becoming a recurring theme. Similarly, according to reports, Hamas is claiming that it's the prime minister that is issuing delay tactics and dragging his feet. This, of course, a statement from Hamas, so consider the source. Also, according to a report by The Telegraph citing two Israeli officials, it's been said that Hamas sent Itamar Ben-Gvir, the security minister, to showing full-on torture and horrendous acts of violence against some of the hostages. We do know from some of the return hostages, like Maya Regev, who told Channel 12 that they would literally pour chlorine and alcohol into her wounds, which included a foot that was almost completely severed, and that they reattached it sideways. Similarly, same thing with her brother, no anesthesia when taking out a gunshot wound. So if you could only imagine the extent of the torture going on in captivity right now, just makes the whole situation that much worse. Itamar Ben-Gvir and other officials deny that Hamas sent that video. The hostage families say true. Whether it's true or not true, obviously this just continues to hammer home the point that we need to bring these hostages home as soon as possible. And again, it's a pretty quiet night here today. We haven't seen a lot of the families, but of course, many of them deflated. And come Thursday, there will be a big rally here and in the Kiryat, given that it will be 300 days since the abduction and the October 7th massacre.
Right, Emily Francis there in Hostages Square. Thank you for that. And Daron, just to tie this in, if there would be a confrontation in the north and it would erupt further, that may yet be another complication in terms of the timing.
The tragedy in the north and the possible response of Israel complicates, and the exchange of fire that would follow, of course, complicates the issue of hostage deal. The whole idea was a hostage deal, a ceasefire, and then
a ceasefire in the north as well.
No, a ceasefire, and then a ceasefire in the north, and then a window of opportunity for diplomatic exchange, and then some resolution. But right now, everything gets more complicated.
Right.
This is what we're hearing from the United States as well. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is exactly what he said. He said this is now the time for a ceasefire deal, for a hostage release deal, so that we have this period of calm in the south and that Hezbollah then stops their firing and you can have that space for negotiations to have some sort of another deal in the north to halt these tensions.
All right, all connected, and we'll see. Hopefully there'll be some kind of progress towards a hostage deal in the coming days, though unfortunately I've said that many times. Let's move now to a dramatic and very troubling incident at the Sde Teiman military base in southern Israel, where hundreds of Palestinian prisoners from Gaza, some of involved in the October 7th attack, are being held. Now, IDF military police today entered the facility to detain for questioning 9 reservists serving there, following allegations they may have been involved in the abuse, even the sexual abuse, of one of the prisoners. Now, in response, Knesset members and activists from National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir's far-right Jewish Power Party forced their way into the grounds of the IDF base, demanding that the Army Advocate General end its investigation into the abuse allegations. Well, here's what Minister Ben-Gvir had to say, along with one of the activists speaking to I-24 News there at Sde Teiman today.
I call on the Army Advocate General. Take your hands off our reservists. Like it is in the prison service, so it is in the IDF. Our fighters deserve full support.
First of all, I was injured at the Sderot gas station on October 7th. We came here because we won't allow the Army Advocate General to arrest our soldiers. Our soldiers protect us with their bodies, and they are getting killed every day in order to protect this nation. And we won't let them be destroyed. And we will fight until all our fighters can return home. We won't compromise. We won't move from here. We've set up tents. We'll sleep here until all our soldiers can go home.
Now, in fact, all the protesters were turned away from the base by police. Took some time, though, apparently. They say no force was used. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu did release a brief statement condemning the break-in at the base and calling for a calming of the situation on all sides. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that, quote, even in moments of anger, the law applies to everyone. The IDF Chief of Staff, Herzl Halevi, said the actions of the activists at the base were illegal and endangered national security. And Yesh Atid party leader and opposition head Yair Lapid tweeted this. The break-in at the Sde Teiman base is a despicable and dangerous criminal act by Knesset members who weaken and undermine the IDF, weaken and undermine the State of Israel, gnawing away at the foundations of our power from within. The politicians who abandoned the abductees, abandoned security, destroyed Israeli society, are now destroying the chain of command and sanctifying criminality and crime. Doron, I am sure in your long Army career, you have had to deal with investigations. You commanded some units that involved in very tricky operations there. I'd have to say the reaction to it's mixed. That you were having across a lot of the political spectrum condemnation of the activists and Knesset members who forcibly entered this army base, but at the same time condemning as well the Army Advocate General for the detaining of these 9 soldiers. So I want to get certainly get your take on
the
this.
Breaking into the camp is unacceptable. An army has to work. There has to be discipline. There has to be a conduct. There has to be a chain of command. There has to be a code of behavior. And if the army decided that it has to take into questioning somebody, this is part of the what the army has to do. In fact, this is the way we secure soldiers from allegation outside, because we actually, in a credible manner, judge all the operation in the battlefield and for sure in the way they deal with prisoners. So the behavior is unacceptable. I'm fully in the side, of course, of the IDF, as myself as an IDF veteran, and I think we have to be very careful not to politicize issues that has to do with the conduct of the army. This is really a precious place, and if you enter there, you can really break the chain of command of the army, and then the army would function in a fashion which would be a disaster to Israel. I mean, this is a serious event, and I think we'll have to...
Right. There was some criticism, and I want to give to the other side of the way the Army Advocate General and the officers involved that were arresting the soldiers, if they handled it right, going onto the base, and unfortunately footage came out showing them arguing with officers on the base, which is something you very rarely see, and how there is I think it's going to be, and I should say that the Knesset is going to hold a hearing to investigate even the circumstances of how these 9 soldiers were detained.
Yeah, but there's an autonomy to the IDF. There's an autonomy to the legal system of the IDF. There's an autonomy to the chain of commands. When you break into this autonomy, those members of parliament that allow themselves to break into a camp, this is really threatens the strength of the army. And I fully agree when I hear Herzl Halevi says, listen, you are really hurting us, the IDF. So I think we have to be very careful. Events like this cannot be repeated.
Now, Nicole, Sde Teiman this is not the first controversy involving this, and it has been a target of certainly criticism, both from certainly elements here in Israel and as well as abroad internationally.
We haven't heard so much outright condemnation yet from international entities, specifically the U.S.
Well, not to this allegation.
Not to this exactly.
Because this just broke today.
Exactly. But I don't think that it's going to... I do expect some words to come out probably soon because, as you said, this is already a place that has been under multiple investigations. It was just a month or two ago that the Associated Press published a pretty wide-scale article talking about a lot of the abuse that they said they found inside this exact prison facility. And so the message that this really sends to the world right now, from many of these images at least, is that two things. One of them is that all of these allegations of IDF soldiers mistreating many of the detainees, it's clearly, or this could be an indication that those allegations are in fact true. And the other message that we also continue to see condemnation for is the extreme far-right parties that are feeling very brazen enough to commit something like this. These extreme far-right parties that have also been under, let's say, sanctions even from the United States. So there's a target on some of those as well for these extremist activities. And so both of these together, both of these actions do not paint a good image right now, especially in the international spotlight.
All right. Just briefly, I'm going to speak from personal experience now. I served in the IDF during the first Intifada and during my basic training, because there were so many Palestinian prisoners, I was pulled out of my basic training for the artillery and made to guard Palestinian prisoners, a position, Doron, I was not qualified for.
It's not an easy task, and it's really tricky for sure. But, you know, anger and feelings of revenge are not good recipe for the conduct of the army. In the end, we have to be very calm, very cool, and win the war. And to win the war, we also need the legitimation. We need to secure our soldiers from allegation outside. We have to trust our chain of command, and this is the most important thing right now.
All right, and just also noting, as in regards to Nicole said, the eyes of a lot of the world, and we know bodies such as the International Criminal Court are on Israel and on the army and on the justice, the system here, and this kind of event, whatever side is right or wrong, and the way it's being handled is certainly going to be exploited by those who want to, of course, criticize Israel and even sanction Israel as well. So we'll have to see if this is going to be handled correctly. I will ask Doron Avital and Nicole to stay with us. We will go now for a brief break, but stay with us. We lots more coming up on the rundown. We will be right back after a break.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
And welcome back to the Rundown on I-24 News. Now, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has certainly not shied away from anti-Israel comments, especially since October 7th. But his latest remarks are perhaps his strongest, as he has threatened to help aid an invasion into Israeli territory in response to its war on Hamas. So Joe Brown takes a closer look at how seriously Israel should take Erdogan's increasingly incendiary rhetoric.
Another day, another foreign leader threatening Israel.
We need to be very strong so that Israel cannot do these ridiculous things to Palestine. Just as we entered Karabakh, just as we entered Libya, we can do something similar to them.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, a man who before October 7th seemed to be thawing the cold relationship between Ankara and Jerusalem, has suggested that he would help an invasion of Israel in the same way his country funded Azerbaijan's war with Armenia over the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh and gave military support to the UN-backed Libyan government of national accord during the Libyan civil war.
There is no reason for us not to. We only have to be strong so that we can take these steps.
Erdogan's comments do not come as a shock. Just before the Gaza war, Turkey's long-running spats with Israel seemed to be ending when both countries established a diplomatic presence inside the other's country. But following Israel's war with Hamas, the Turkish leader has offered unwavering support to the latter, hosting Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh in Ankara, calling Netanyahu a, quote, Nazi on several occasions, and rebuffing the idea that Hamas is a terror group. Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz slammed Erdogan's statements, comparing the Turkish leader to Saddam Hussein and urging him to take note of the fate of the Iraqi dictator. But will Turkey be the eighth front in Israel's multi-frontal war? Probably not. As a NATO member, Turkey could face severe repercussions for invading a close ally of influential NATO nations. So whilst Erdogan's populist rhetoric may earn adulation from his followers, it remains, at the time being, just rhetoric.
And still with us in studio, our correspondent Nicole Tzedek, Reserves IDF Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital. And joining us now is Dr. Hayatan Konya-Narocek, a Turkey expert at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. As Joe Brown says, we don't expect Turkey to launch a military offensive against Israel. However, in terms of, when we're talking about invasion from Turkey, we have to keep in mind, for example, Turkey basically sponsoring a naval, an attempt to break Israel's naval blockade at the Gaza Strip that turned out to be a hugely problematic situation for Israel and Gaza. And the question is how far Erdogan is willing to go. He has threatened even that particular tactic again.
Well, first of all, I would like to underline that since we are not talking about a junior politician, but we are talking about Turkey's president with all of his jurisdictional rights, and I think we should take him in a very serious manner. Okay, I don't think that we can laugh and we can only say, "Oh no, this is only domestic politics." Okay, I think all of the words should be taken in a serious manner, and in my perspective, the most important problem, it's not that Turkey poses an immediate threat against the national security of the State of Israel, but rather I see this problem as a long-term problem, meaning that nowadays he's planting this hatred and this possibility of imagining the two countries that never fought before, that enjoying a proper relationship since 1949, may confront in the future, okay? So this is something problematic. I lived in Turkey for 22 years. I never heard such a thing before, that two countries,
and
Israel and Turkey,
arguably the two most powerful military forces in the region.
We always witnessed then joint military exercises and cooperation. We all witnessed the Israeli earthquake mission to Turkey that saved lives. So we only witnessed positive things. But the fact that he is now mentioning Israel's name as a threat, as a national security threat for Turkey, and every day almost he's accusing Israel that Israel is seemingly adopting the promised land vision, the so-called promised land vision, that is including the southeast Turkey's territories that we are, seemingly trying to invade there. This is ridiculous. These are all ridiculous conspiracy theories that are, originated maybe in the medieval ages. But unfortunately, we hear from his mouth all of these statements, and many people in Turkey, since they are hearing them from him, so they believe him, and this is a real problem. And I think that Israel should, reconsider Turkey's status. Maybe if we are not tagging Turkey as a friendly country anymore after these statements, I think we should take this country as an opponent state.
Briefly, how realistic? One thing they could do is provide a secure base for Hamas. Something that it's been talked about. How realistic do you think that is?
I think this is realistic. If he is referring to Turkey's actions in Libya and in Nagorno-Karabakh, this is exactly what the Turks did through their company called Sadat. This is a company that, it's an unofficial, it's not state-sponsored country. It's sort of a Wagner, the Turkish Wagner company, okay? And they sent to Libya, for instance, many military equipment, including UAVs. So this is a question mark whether Turkey will try to provide UAVs to Hamas. And, this is incredible. I even do not believe what I'm talking right now.
Right. Really, this is something that...
of course, this is a very strong military. It's a sort of an regional empire like us. And, of course, they have a very strong navy in comparison to our very relatively small navy. So they have a way to challenge us. I think this brings home a point that we're emphasizing here again and again. We are in changing times. We are part of a coalition. And in this context, we have to play with our coalition, with the U.S., with Europe, with NATO, minus plus Turkey, and with the Sunnite moderate Arab countries. So we have to think coalition. We live in a coalition game right now, and we have to be a constructive player in the coalition.
All right, certainly. So regional alliance is becoming very important. Dr. Hayatan Cohen-Yanorocek, thank you for joining us on The Rundown. We want to go to the United States now, and our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, who was at UN headquarters in New York. And Mike, a lot happening, certainly in this part of the region, in this part of the world, that I think is going to make it into those discussion forums at the UN. But also, let's look at Washington. We discussed briefly earlier their concerns about what is happening here, especially now in northern Israel.
First off, it's notable here from the UN that there's not a Security Council meeting this morning. Of course, if there was an attack on a soccer field in Gaza, there's no doubt there'd be an emergency session the next day, but we haven't seen such calls here at the United Nations from those familiar Security Council members. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things ongoing, including, as you mentioned, discussions in Washington of great significance right now. And John Kirby, the spokesman for the National Security Council, addressed reporters earlier today virtually and said that there is no doubt whatsoever in Washington's mind that Hezbollah bears responsibility for the rocket attack in northern Israel, regardless of their denials. He said, quote, it was their rocket. It came from an area under their control, and he doesn't buy their denials. That coming from John Kirby. He did say, though, there is still time and space for a diplomatic solution, however difficult that may be at this point in time. Kirby said he does not expect Israel's response to lead to a larger escalation in the region. When asked why he assumed that, he wouldn't get into those particulars, but he said that he doesn't believe that the response, however much Israel has the right to do so, is going to lead to a larger escalation in the region. He said, quote unquote, though, Israel does have every right to respond, unquote, to that rocket attack. That's the latest there from John Kirby. By the way, of lesser significance, but in a broader diplomatic scope, Kalev, Kirby was asked specifically whether, based on statements over the weekend from the likes of the National Security Council advisor spokesperson, from statements from Vice President Kamala Harris's National Security Advisor, whether the stance still applies from the Trump administration that northern Israel, and specifically the Golan Heights, is still under Israeli sovereignty, because those statements reflected a policy of the Golan Heights still being under Israeli sovereignty. Kirby said, yes, that policy is still in place. The Biden administration has not changed it. The Golan Heights still under Israeli sovereignty, according to the current Biden administration policy.
Interesting, because I think there are some U.S. officials who talk in terms of occupied Golan Heights, and of course we certainly see the rest of the world still use that terminology. Mike, if you can, please stay with us. We're going to turn now to domestic U.S. politics, and as the elections there heat up, the political trash talking is heating up as well, is running wild even. Now, former president and Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump is trying, among other tactics, to paint his new opponent, Vice President Kamala Harris, as a bad choice for Jewish voters, especially those that support Israel. Meanwhile, an American Jewish governor has emerged as one of the top contenders to join Harris on the Democratic ticket as her possible VP pick. Our Nicole Sedek has the details.
Two political opponents leading a very tight race. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are nearly tied in the polls. Trump barely leading with 49%, according to the Wall Street Journal. And as the competition heats up, so does the smack talk.
Kamala Harris's deadly destruction of America's borders is completely and totally disqualifying for her to be president.
Donald Trump has an extreme and divisive agenda for a second term.
A repeated attack coming from the former president aims to paint Harris as the wrong choice for Jewish voters.
She doesn't like Jewish people. She doesn't like Israel. I actually don't know how a person who's Jewish can vote for her.
Harris describes this stream of attacks as weird.
And you may have noticed Donald Trump has been resorting to some wild lies about my record, and some of what he and his running mate are saying, well, it's just plain weird.
Not only is Harris married to a Jewish man, she's also said to be considering two men with Jewish ties as her running mate. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro is a strong supporter of Israel, has a tough stance against pro-Palestinian campus protests, and could help lock down the swing state he resides in. Another top contender is Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, whose wife, former member of Congress Gabby Giffords, is known for wearing her Jewish identity proudly. Still, Harris's criticism of Israel's handling of the war in Gaza is enough for Trump to attack, in an effort to paint himself as the Zionist pick for president.
Mike, the Democrats have had a Jewish vice presidential candidate before, the late Senator Joe Lieberman, though unfortunately that ticket with Al Gore didn't go to victory. How likely would, say, Josh Shapiro be? And the question is whether this is a wedge issue with potential Jewish voters. We could see already the difference in tone, not only between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump when it comes to Israel, but between Vice President Harris and Joe Biden, even just at least rhetorically on some of the issues when it comes certainly to Israel.
There's no doubt Israel is going to be a wedge issue, and Donald Trump and a fundraiser, Jewish fundraiser in Deal, New Jersey, last night making comments to the effect that, you'd be out of your mind if you're a Jew to vote for Kamala Harris. Josh Shapiro has been a star in the waiting in the Democratic Party since he was elected governor of Pennsylvania, and even in the years before that, I think many could see his star was quickly going to rise. We didn't know it would be this quick to be included in high-level talk on a potential vice presidential candidacy. As Nicole's report was airing, I just noticed a statement from the Democratic Socialists of America's Philadelphia chapter condemning talk of Josh Shapiro becoming a vice presidential nominee due to his stance on Israel and the Palestinians. So there's no doubt this is going to be a wedge issue. The question is, does Kamala Harris feel that it can be overcome? Is winning Pennsylvania and potentially securing Pennsylvania with the help of Josh Shapiro good enough for her and valuable enough for her to overcome what would be certainly disappointment and possibly anger on the far left fringes of the Democratic Party for Shapiro's pro-Israel stances? And could it affect other areas such as Michigan, which Harris would feel would be of lesser value? That's the question right now lingering over the Harris campaign. I think in the end, she'll make a decision independent of that particular issue. I don't think it's enough to cause weight one way or another in the outcome of the election. But it's certainly something that I think is going to be under strong consideration from the Harris campaign, especially given Harris's statement in the aftermath of her meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu at the White House on Thursday.
Yeah, and Nicole, I'd give you a chance to pick up on some of what Mike said, because that, as he mentioned, there's a choice. Harris trying to appeal this to the big tent of the Democratic politics, those young progressives, some of them who have been out protesting, the Arab American voters in Michigan, and of course Jewish voters who traditionally have supported the Democratic Party. Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly told Donald Trump it was by habit, and a habit that Donald Trump would love to break.
Certainly, and that's why we're continuing to see this rhetoric coming out from former President Donald Trump trying to pin himself as the best choice for these Jewish voters, because he knows that it's not the traditional choice for many of them that have typically been more liberal voting Democrats, likely voted even for Biden. But Biden, as you said, had a stronger stance towards Israel. And so even through the course of this war with Kamala Harris, even behind closed doors, we hear more and more of those almost bickering between Biden and Harris.
And they had disagreed. She's calling for a ceasefire much quicker than, for example, than he did.
Especially following that. And so the problem then being, though, just as Mike was quick to note, the fact that we're seeing more and more of these far left voters, and while it might not be the number one thing that's on their mind when it comes to the elections, it is a big thing on their mind. Take a look just at the Republican National Convention. When you're looking at the protests that were outside there arguing against the Republican National Convention, the main imagery we saw was pro-Palestinian imagery. If we're not looking at the we're not looking at the pro-abortion, the LGBTQ plus signs, we're really seeing more of this imaging.
All right, it's definitely going to be interesting, a campaign going forward. Nicole Tzedek, Doron Avital, or Mike Wagenheim, thank you for joining us. We're going to continue and look at another election, this one in Venezuela, where President Nicolas Maduro, who has ruled the South American nation with a strong hand for 11 years, is claiming victory in an election that is being challenged by supporters of the opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, and much of the international community as well. Now, over the years, Maduro has shown himself as a staunch ally of Iran and a harsh critic of Israel. Fabio Shapiro looks at whether his authoritarian rule will survive this current controversy.
I can say in front of the people of Venezuela and the world, I'm President Nicolas Maduro Mora, re-elected president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
With about 51% of the votes, the Venezuelan Electoral Authority has announced the victory of President Nicolas Maduro, allowing him to stay in power for another 6 years. The party of the former dictator Hugo Chavez has been in power for the last 25 years, but the results were not accepted by all.
What happened during today's polling day was a violation of all the rules, to the point that the majority of electoral registers have still not been handed over. Our message of reconciliation and peaceful change still stands. We are convinced most Venezuelans also want this. Our struggle continues, and we won't rest until the will of the people of Venezuela is respected.
The opposition has claimed that their candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, has won the election with 70% of the vote. The election was also contested by many groups across Venezuelan society, who see it as another fraud to keep the authoritarian government in power.
I want to be in my home. I want to be in my country. This is not fair. It's not fair. I wanted a free Venezuela. This was our last hope, and they took it from us because Maduro is a dog and he won't let go of power. Let go of power and allow us to be free. Let us return home. Let us return home.
I am sad because we lost hope for a better Venezuela.
So far, most Western and Latin American nations have not accepted the results of the election and have asked for verification of the votes. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that he's concerned that the results announced don't reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people. Venezuela broke ties with Israel in 2009, with then President Hugo Chavez condemning and cursing Israel and declaring support for Palestine. If a new government is formed, a new hope for the rekindling of relations is expected.
Once Venezuela recovers the democratic track, which means Maria Corina Machado will be with her new government, after the U.S., she will immediately renew the relations with Israel. At that point, I think it will be a win-win situation. I see that Venezuela and Israel, they complement their economy, each other. Venezuela has people, has lands, has a good weather, has lots of resources. Israel has knowledge, has technology. So the combination of both is a win-win to do many things.
A new government would also mean new foreign policy. Venezuela has become a close partner of Iran and its proxies in South America, acting as a hub for terrorism in the region.
Iran in Venezuela is very dangerous, and the history has proven. Iran goes inside Venezuela, and once you are in Venezuela, you can move in all Latin America. So she has proven how difficult she is. I want to tell you one fact. And a few days ago, we celebrated the 30 years of the AMIA in Buenos Aires. Okay? The director of the Mossad told me directly that the people that did in the AMIA, they left Venezuela. There's an island called Margarita. They left there and they went. So Venezuela is a gateway to all Latin America. That's very dangerous.
This is not the first time the election was contested. In 2018, opposition candidate Juan Guaido said that the elections were fraudulent and declared himself president. He was recognized by the U.S. and the European Union, but had to leave the country in fear of arrest, and he's disappeared from public life.
Let's move now to the Paris Olympics, where not every competitor, unfortunately, is exhibiting sportsmanlike behavior. Now, the International Judo Federation is investigating whether an Algerian athlete intentionally gained so much weight that he was ruled out of fighting an Israeli judoka in the judo competition. Now, this isn't the first anti-Israeli incident at this year's games, and it's also not the first incident between an Algerian and Israeli judoka at the Olympics. Joe Brown has this story.
Israel's appearance at international events during the Gaza war was always going to be contentious. We saw it during Eurovision, and now we are seeing it at the Olympics.
I think there is a small group of people, very noisy, very unhuman, very coward, that choose to, to destroy the Olympic values and spirit.
In preparation for the inevitable backlash against an Israeli presence, French police bulked up security around the Israeli athletes in a joint operation with the Shin Bet. But despite this, French police have received reports of death threats against 3 Israeli athletes and allegations of anti-Semitic chanting at Israeli Olympic football games. But it's not just the crowd who are giving Israelis a hard time, it's the athletes too. Algerian judoka Redouane Massoud-Driss is accused of intentionally bulking to weigh more than 73 kilograms to avoid playing Israeli judo star Toha Boutboul.
And I think this is a disgrace. I think that You know, you can play with the way in the category. I wasn't prepared, but everybody knows this is political issues. My heart goes to this athlete. I'm sure it's not his decision. I'm sure it's, the management. And I think these guys, the coach, the delegation, has to be punished because it's not about the athlete. He's a victim of the system, you know?
Incredibly, it's not the first time football has been at the centre of an Algerian-manufactured Olympic storm. In the last Olympics 3 years ago, Algeria's Fethi Nourine refused to play against eventual bronze medalist Boutboul, earning the Algerian a 10-year ban from competing. And this is not the only incident involving an Israeli judoka at this year's Games. After Tajikistan's Nurali Emamali beat the Israeli Baruch Shmailov, the Tajik refused to shake Shmailov's hand, reportedly yelling Allahu Akbar instead. But in a twist of irony, in the next round, Emamali suffered a dislocated shoulder and was defeated, meaning he couldn't shake anyone's hand even if he wanted to. But despite the safety concerns, Yael Arad, head of the Israeli Olympic Committee and a former Olympic judoka herself, says that what has been experienced online and on the ground couldn't be further apart.
You know, there are in several occasions threats, real threats, directly to the telephones of the athletes and their families that they're going to die. Threats that you shouldn't come to Paris because we will kill you. But I must say that on the other side, we get here in Paris so much love from so many people.
Well, let's wish all good luck to those Israeli athletes who are competing there under pretty difficult conditions there at the Paris Olympics. And while I wouldn't want to wish a broken shoulder on anyone, I think somebody at the Olympics got what was coming to him in the end. That ends our program for this evening. Of course, you continue to follow us on our website and all our social media platforms. We'll be back tomorrow with a whole new program. In the meantime, when I have the time to say it, I do say let's see the hostages back home as soon as possible, in any way possible. And if you have the time, catch the rundown. Thanks for joining.